A reading from 1 Samuel and chapter 16. The Lord said to Samuel, "How long will you grieve over Saul, since I have rejected him from being king over Israel? Fill your horn with oil and go. I will send you to Jesse the Bethlehemite, for I have provided for myself a king among his sons." And Samuel said, "How can I go? If Saul hears it, he will kill me." And the Lord said, "Take a heifer with you and say, 'I have come to sacrifice to the Lord.' And invite Jesse to the sacrifice, and I will show you what you shall do. And you shall anoint for me him whom I declare to you." Samuel did what the Lord commanded and came to Bethlehem. The elders of the city came to meet him, trembling, and said, "Do you come peaceably?" And he said, "Peaceably. I have come to sacrifice to the Lord. Consecrate yourselves and come with me to the sacrifice." And he consecrated Jesse and his sons and invited them to the sacrifice. When they came, he looked on Eliab and thought, "Surely the Lord's anointed is before him." But the Lord said to Samuel, "Do not look on his appearance or on the height of his stature, because I have rejected him. For the Lord sees not as man sees. Man looks on the outward appearance, but the Lord looks on the heart." Then Jesse called Abinadab and made him pass before Samuel. And he said, "Neither has the Lord chosen this one." Then Jesse made Shammah pass by, and he said, "Neither has the Lord chosen this one." And Jesse made 7 of his sons pass before Samuel. And Samuel said to Jesse, "The Lord has not chosen these." Then Samuel said to Jesse, "Are all your sons here?" And he said, "There remains yet the youngest, but behold, he is keeping the sheep." And Samuel said to Jesse, "Send and get him, for we will not sit down till he comes here." And he sent and brought him in. Now he was ruddy and had beautiful eyes and was handsome. And the Lord said, "Arise, anoint him, for this is he." Then Samuel took the horn of oil and anointed him in the midst of his brothers. And the Spirit of the Lord rushed upon David from that day forward. And Samuel rose up and went to Ramah. Many years ago, when I was a Baptist minister in Cheltenham, I went to visit somebody in a nearby cottage hospital in Winchcombe. And because it was outside of the normal visiting hours, I thought the safest thing to do was to put a dog collar on so that I could get some sort of admittance onto the ward, because normally speaking, clergy can get in outside of the normal visiting hours. And so I put this thing on and I went and I visited the person in hospital. All was fine. And afterwards I thought, well, we'll go down to the butcher's and we'll get some sausages ready to eat that evening. And so I went into the butcher's. And as I ordered my sausages, the butcher, clearly thinking I was the vicar of Winchcombe, gave me a freebie, I think 1 or 2 extra sausages, as a gift. And I thought, well, that's all very well and good. I was a bit embarrassed, so I didn't say anything, and I went off. And as I was driving back from Winchcombe back to Cheltenham, there coming in the opposite direction towards me was the vicar of Winchcombe, riding on his bicycle, no doubt heading towards the butcher's. And there was that extra sausage almost looking at me, inducing guilt from the passenger seat. Now, I'm telling you all of this nonsense not because I want to give you top tips for defrauding butchers, but rather because we tend to judge people by what they wear. Because I was wearing a dog collar, it was assumed, reasonably enough, that I was a vicar. If you see somebody wearing a policeman's uniform, you assume that they are a policeman. We judge people by how they look. We judge people by the externals. And this is what is going on in this passage. But we are told in the passage that God doesn't look on the outward forms, but rather God looks at the heart. One of the many ways in which God is very different indeed from us. We often judge by people's outward appearance, but God judges by the heart. And this stress on the heart is an important one. Now, this is all taking place at around 1000 BC, and when Jesus is teaching 1000 years later, he too talks about the importance of the heart. He says this, "There is nothing outside a person that by going into him can defile him, but the things that come out of a person are what defiled him." And this is in Mark 7, and when the disciples quizzed him what he meant, Jesus went on to say this, Do you not see that whatever goes into a person from outside cannot defile him, since it enters not his heart, but his stomach and is expelled? Thus he declared all foods clean. And he said, whatever comes out of a person is what defiles him. For from within, out of the heart of man, come evil thoughts, sexual immorality, theft, murder, adultery, coveting, wickedness, deceit, sensuality, envy, slander, pride, foolishness. All these evil things come from within, and they defile a person. And as Samuel was reminded, the Lord looks on the heart. The heart is the seat of all these things. The heart is the seat of our will, of our actions. And that is what God judges, which is a sobering thing. God doesn't look on our externals, dog collar or whatever it might be, but on our own hearts. So what do we do? Because after all, as the psalmist reminds us in Psalm 130, if you, O Lord, should mark iniquities, O Lord, who could stand? So if our heart is full of this sort of stuff, and if our heart is what we're judged on, well, what can we do? Well, actually, we can find an example in the life of David a little later on. You'll remember the whole sorry tale of David and Bathsheba. And what is extraordinary is that after David has sinned in that way with Bathsheba, and then remember how he sent Bathsheba's husband to die, we actually have a psalm from David which he wrote after this incident. We can see something of David's inner workings of his mind. Imagine that, being able to see into the thinking of a man 3,000 years ago. But we can. And we find then in Psalm 51 that David prays in that psalm, create in me a clean heart, O God, and renew a right spirit within me. Create in me a clean heart, O God, and renew a right spirit within me. This prayer of David was for a fresh start, for his heart to be renewed. He knew that his heart was rotten, that it needed to be cleansed, and he prayed that that would happen. We find that idea taken up by Ezekiel a little bit later on. And in the prophecy of Ezekiel we read, and I will give them one heart and a new spirit I will put within them. I will remove the heart of stone from their flesh and give them a heart of flesh. So we have this prayer of King David looking forward to a cleansed heart. We have this prophecy of Ezekiel saying that the time will come when a heart of flesh will be given to us to replace our stony, hard hearts. And this is what the work of Christ does. It creates this new heart within us. It takes away all the rubbish that is out from our hearts, and he transfers it to his shoulders, and he nails it to the cross. This is what Paul means in Colossians 2, where we read, this he set aside, nailing it to the cross. This is why later in Colossians Paul can write, you have put off the old self with its practices and have put on the new self, which is being renewed in knowledge after the image of its creator. Now, I've given you lots of verses here. I've spoken a lot about different concepts, but we can really put the whole thing this simply, that the point of Christianity is a renovation of the heart. It's not about outward practices, because God doesn't look on the outside things. It's about renewing our hearts, because that is what God considers. And the work of the Holy Spirit in the life of the believer is simply that, a renovation of the heart. Yes, we will mess up from time to time, but then we can echo that prayer of David, create a clean heart within me. But over time, as we carry on this work of the Holy Spirit within us, as we carry on this work of Christianity, we find that our heart is being renewed and being made more Christ-like. Christianity is not a religion of duties. Christianity is a religion of transformation, as we live not from the outside in, from outward acts inwards, but rather we live from the inside out. Our heart is changed, and therefore our actions are changed.